Hello, I'm Dr Audrey Tang and welcome to this special of Mental Health Matters After Hours. It is a 2-hour special on a very important topic, that of invisible illness, whether that's mental or physical. If somebody can't see it, often to them it doesn't exist. And that means the struggles you're going through, the effort you have to put in, some of that is dismissed by other people. They just simply can't see it. And the worst part is, if they can't see it, you start thinking, hang on, am I actually ill? So we want to unpack this really important topic. We have people sharing their lived experiences. We have experts coming in to talk about why it's so important to take a person-centered approach. Let's head over to the main studio. A huge welcome to our first panel. You know Jude from Mental Health Matters After Hours and Office Hours every single Thursday. And you also know Aaron because he is a returning guest. So it's a great pleasure to have you both here. Do you mind just giving your own introduction to your experience with the idea of invisible illness, please? Jude.
Yes, I was diagnosed with an invisible illness, rheumatoid arthritis, about 20 years ago now. So that's something that nobody can see, and the effects are not visible. You know, I don't get a rash. So it's something that, unless I tell people, they don't know that I've got. And also I'm quite clumsy. So, you know, on a completely separate note. So I've had quite a lot of, you know, broken bones and things over the years as well. So they're more visible.
But that could also relate to the arthritis.
It could be. I mean, rheumatoid arthritis is an autoimmune disease.
Right.
So yes, it could if I'm having a flare up and I'm in particular pain, it could contribute to that. It also makes you tired, so you know, lapse in concentration.
And then with that, you then described yourself as clumsy. You've almost got people then going, well, she's just clumsy. They don't think that actually there's something else going on. And this is similar to yourself, and we were talking before the show as well, Aaron. Do you mind sharing your story?
Yeah, so clinical depression and anxiety, but more recently, actually, in the last week, I've had a diagnosis of ADHD and autism. So yeah, it's quite similar to yourself, and you know, people see, like, they quote lazy, and it's not that. It's you don't have the energy to get up and go about your day, and people just think you're being lazy.
And it affects your mental well-being, doesn't it? Because people have labelled you unfairly.
Yeah, definitely, and it kind of it just puts you down when you kind of don't need putting down. Yeah,
and you need support and ways of managing it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And actually, I just find if people just speak to each other a bit more, you find out that you will have ways of managing it that could be implemented, and this is what we're going to get on to. Now, to our panel, I wanted to open today's show with a story from one of our audience members, and this is Molly Fenton. She's a TEDx speaker, she's an activist, and she was diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumour. And she's kindly allowed me to share the story, which highlights her individual journey, and I just wanted to know what resonates with you when you hear it. So she says this: at 16, I was told I had a ticking time bomb in my brain. This made the words brain tumour sound softer. I started social media platforms to document my life as an ill young woman, and not one of those feel bad for me crying videos, trying to change the narrative and influencing change. From being a Welsh Government stakeholder for Period Proud Wales and oversharing about my body and symptoms, and my body telling me how sick I was, starting with period changes, and now to becoming a keynote, to speaking, to being vulnerable on what it's like living with something that only a small percentage can survive, and I'm currently waiting on MRI results. I've also had vision changes. It's been a challenging time to navigate. So she's doing all of this amazing stuff because she wants to raise awareness, but she's struggling with the condition and the medical appointments and all of those things at the same time, which she then goes on to say, I've showed up to events, I've travelled across the country, I've put on a lab coat to visit research labs, I've performed speeches about the importance of health education as living proof, I've done news interviews, I've been really busy, but my body hasn't been happy.
Not surprised.
Yeah.
and this is something I think that will really resonate with you, Aaron. Due to a lack of sleep, I've become more unwell, paired with nerves, making it harder to eat, increasing sickness. And I've been doing so well in improving my solid food intake until now. And now I get migraines. So I turned up to one speech with a drooping face, and I had to assure one person I didn't need an ambulance because they panicked when they saw me. Why am I sharing this? Living with illness, disability, trauma, or even going through rough patches can have adverse effects on our body and therefore our work. I've pushed through it this time. Probably wasn't the best idea, but I love to get what I do and how my mind is feeling, and I need those results, and I need people to see that. But physically, I'm paying the price. Illness and disability is severely underestimated, with 1.2 million people in Wales living with a long-term health condition. You can't see mine massively. And it reminds me how I got on the train last week and got tutted at by a man who sat next to me in the disability seats, following a remark to his wife, calling me a woke, attention-seeking youngster.
Oh, my word.
He didn't know I had vision loss, balance issues, and if he could see a brain tumour on the outside of my brain, he probably wouldn't have questioned it. I don't understand why people can't just learn to adapt and navigate it all. And if you don't understand that either, lucky you.
Gosh.
Yeah.
That's really, I mean, the fact is you're both here today as well.
Yeah.
And that's taken effort, and that we can't necessarily see.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we were talking before the show, I've had a real lack of sleep recently because of like my mental health issues, and people don't see that. They just kind of see what the side of you that we want to show you. And if people could look at us with like an X-ray,
yes,
then they would actually be able to see what's going on inside.
Yes, on that, do you mind sharing some of those emotions and along with the physical demand that you have to kind of physically put yourself through, because you want to do well, you want to show up to everything, but your body's going, I can't.
Yeah, I mean, like getting out of bed is one of the hardest things to do. On days where you're not having a good day, you've woken up, maybe lack of sleep, or you haven't had a great day the day before, or maybe just woken up feeling low. The last thing you want to do is get out of bed and kind of go and like face the world. And then that takes like a real toll on like your hygiene as well.
Yes.
Because you kind of just want to bed rot and stay in your room all day, and then you don't brush your teeth, you don't jump in the shower, don't comb your hair, for example. And then like your hygiene's taken a massive toll as well. And these things, they take a lot of energy. And people kind of don't see that, you're just kind of, you're out and about. People don't recognise the toll that it takes.
Something that you said on a previous show, and it always sticks with me, is that you said people don't realise that I'm fighting my thoughts every minute of the day and how exhausting that is.
Yeah.
And that really made me think about how hard and how much energy is already being taken. I mean, how do you help people understand that? That's a great metaphor. It's really brilliant. It's a really great description. But how do you get people, like workplaces and people, to really get it?
I think there has to be like a willingness to learn from their side.
Yeah.
I think people don't really want to learn. I think they kind of, they don't experience these things and therefore don't believe them. And then I think that they take it lightly, and what they say to you, when you try and like raise awareness with them, they just don't want to take it on board. There really has to be like that willingness to learn and understand and believe us. It's like, I watch a lot of The Office, and in the latter seasons, Nellie becomes the manager somehow, and she talks about how fairies don't exist if you don't believe in them. And that's kind of like how it feels sometimes, where like if people don't believe in your mental health issues or like your conditions because they can't see them and they haven't experienced them, then it doesn't necessarily exist to them, and then you can't tell them or show them because they don't believe in it. That's awful, because that will almost bring down all of the work that everyone's been trying to do to make mental health a more prominent subject
Oh my goodness, that's so true. And willingness to learn is something we talked about on the show before. Jude, now I know sometimes you have the opposite problem. You were talking about physical injury, and I remember one show where you were absolutely determined not to show your cast. You really did. And you don't want people to treat you, oh, she's injured, because there's a stigma around that as well, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think, because I'm quite clumsy, and it's easy for people who I know really well to say, oh, what's she done now? But people that I don't know so well might also think that. So, and I feel that, whether it's real or not, that's how I feel. So yeah, I think I had a bright pink cast, and I think on one show I covered it up with tinsel. I just can't be. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want anyone to refer to it necessarily. If someone's going to say, "Oh my goodness, how are you okay?" That's fine. That's really kind. But I don't want to dwell on it, and I don't want to make a big thing of it, and I don't want allowances to be made. I drove all the way back from Dorset with it because my husband was feeling really unwell, didn't want to drive. So rather than say, actually, it's really painful, I did it because I don't want to make a fuss. I don't want to draw attention to it. So that's just the way that I am, rightly or wrongly, I don't know. That's just the way that I am. And I just think that comes a lot from maybe the way that you're brought up. You're sent to school unless your leg falls off. It doesn't matter what's wrong with you. Just, no, you're going to school, that's it. Or I know I had an experience with a boss, actually. And this was when I was newly diagnosed with the rheumatoid arthritis. And I had a lot of joint pain, and, I couldn't really sit for long in a chair, but it was one of those companies where you sort of chained to your chair until lunchtime. And I tried to explain to my boss, and he was like, he said, when people ask you how you are in the morning, they don't actually want to know. So don't tell them you're feeling a little bit in pain today. So I think kind of your learned experiences, don't they? They all go together, and then you are who you are because of all of that. So that's just what I do. I
mean, that leads me on to my next question for both of you, really, because there is a balance between oversharing, wanting people and needing people to know to some extent, but also when you do let people know, it's about respecting the way that you're managing that narrative. How do you balance that? How do you share and kind of hope that people pick up the signals you're giving out about how much you want to talk and how much you don't?
For me personally, I think I'm probably an oversharer. I go to the man cave, who have meetings in Bedford, Northampton and Milton Keynes. But I go there and I like to be as open as possible.
But that's a space to share.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then also, while I'm at uni, we have what's called process group. So because we're all training to be therapists, we have a space for us to be open and share. Yeah. But I also think it's really important to raise awareness on the things that aren't so, I don't want to say glamorous, but there's there's this image around depression and anxiety, and I think it's important that people understand the whole picture.
Yes.
And not just take certain things. So for me, I like to be as open as possible, and any opportunity I kind of get to talk and help raise awareness, then I'll try and do that in till its entirety, because again, I feel like people need the whole picture, and I feel if I'm raising awareness, then I want it to be full. Like that.
That's really important because yes, that is that glamorization of certain illnesses, and then the media doesn't always help with that either in the way it's portrayed on television. So I think you're absolutely right. In the space to share, it's quite important to be honest and raw about it. No, thank you. And what about you, Jude? How do you manage that with friends and then perhaps professional colleagues with the thank you for asking, let's stop the conversation there? How do you manage that, what you want to share with people?
It's quite, well, I have a blanket, I just don't talk about it. And if somebody asks me how I am, generally I say, oh, I'm really, really well, thanks. Because I think that's what generally, like you're saying, most people want to hear. But in terms of how I manage actual physical things in the workplace, I mean, most of the time I work from home anyway, so it's okay. and when I'm out and about in meetings, for example, then if you've got bright pink casts on your arm, people are going to ask you how you are and what happened and how did you do it, and I'll answer those questions. But then that's the end of it. So it's not a thing for me. I just kind of get on with everything, despite what I might have.
Yeah. And when it comes to any support you might need, how does having almost an instruction manual help explain that to other people? So with, say, when you had the cast on, there were certain things you could do, certain things you couldn't. If you are going through a particularly bad day, there will be certain things that you want to do, certain things that you just cannot manage. But you'll have that awareness, and sometimes voicing that, almost like an instruction manual, can help others, or does it?
I think it kind of depends on who you're talking to.
True.
I think like the context of the situation is important. It also depends on like the day that the other person's had as well. So like sometimes, like, say if my mum's had a stressful day at work, she's come home and I'm still like not in bed, but I haven't showered or whatever, and I'm just on my Xbox. If she's had a bad day and she comes home and sees that, she might be quite stressed, and then she might kind of think like, oh, he's kind of not done anything all day. Whereas if she's had a good day, then she might come home and be like, oh, yeah, you're all right, and so I think it kind of just depends on the situation. Like, I think it's important to have like establish some ground rules with people, especially like the ones that you like communicate with and see very often. So like I live at home with my family, and like we have like a keyword, for example, because so it's a town in Sicily called Lipari, because that was where I first opened up to my parents about how I felt. So if I say Lipari, then they understand that, oh, actually he's not having a good day, maybe we should give him some space. But also, let's not nurse his unhealthy habits. Like, if he is just bedridden, let's try and get him out in like a nice way, and that. So yeah, I think it's important to kind of know who you're talking to, like, your context and things like that, and just kind of have like establish some ground rules and stuff.
I love that.
I think that's really nice, because your family obviously really know you well, and they know how to handle you, know whether to be sort of, kind but firm, or whether to leave you to it, etc. So that's really nice. It's probably slightly different if you're working somewhere and people don't really know you. That might be a bit more tricky to navigate.
I mean, like, I've been in situations with work, and like I just kind of what I'll do is I'll like, when I join, I'll kind of seek out like the right people. So I recently worked at Smith's Toys, just like a Christmas temp, and they were really good. They had like a sign on the toilet door, and it said like, if you're feeling low, talk to these people. And so what I did is I sought them out, and I said like, I'm on like antidepressant, antipsychotic, like these are the things I'm dealing with, like, like I'm just, again, it's like establishing like the ground rules, and just like saying like, I want to make you aware of this, just so that I can be like transparent with you, and like the more open and transparent I can be, the better I can be helped, I guess.
Oh my goodness. I'm really glad we're getting into this discussion. We're now going to go over to resident stress consultant Felicia Jones, who talks about managing stress when you're also dealing with an invisible illness. Thank you so much for joining us, Felicia. And let's talk about stress and the effect on the body. First of all, do you mind helping us understand and really sort of unpack some of those mixed emotions that someone feels when something that seems so easy for them and so normal for them suddenly really isn't?
When I've spoken to clients, when I've run workshops, one of the things that really comes out is the frustration that people feel, the sheer frustration at not being able to either express fully how they're feeling, or that people don't understand. They just don't get it. And you know, that's really understandable. I mean, if we're talking about conditions, and when I was thinking about this, I was thinking particularly about hidden illness. So, you know, if we're talking about things like fibromyalgia, you know, I've talked a lot about me before having chronic fatigue syndrome, endometritis, something like that, or, you know, IBS. For the person experiencing this, it's really debilitating. It's an awful situation. But from people from the outside, they can't see what's going on in the inside.
Yes.
I mean, it sounds really obvious, but it's really challenging when you can't see it or you don't understand to be able to relate to, you know, somebody who's going through that illness. And often, if you're going through that illness, it can be confusing as well. One thing that can happen is that you have these, you know, experiences that are unpredictable. 1 minute, you can be flat on your back. There's nothing you can do. Have no energy, feel awful. And then the next minute, you feel like, I've got loads of energy. I can do lots of things. I want to do lots of things. So from the outside, that's confusing. Well, you know, you were lying in bed, you couldn't do anything, and now all of a sudden you're fine. You want to go out for a coffee, you want to go shopping. So, you know, that confusion for the person going through it and the people around them, and particularly when it's people that are close to you, I think that's what people have said, that can be hard. And, you know, the truth is we still have a lot of shame around illness.
Yes.
We're in this society which says, you know, we should be strong, we should be capable, be able to deal with everything. And when you're ill, you're seen as, the truth is, lesser than. If it's a long-term illness, that you're not able to do what everybody else does. And so people can mask, people can, you know, try and cover that shame. And I know particularly, because I work with a lot of people who are working, that when you're working, it can be a problem. And so people are masking those hidden illnesses all the time.
You've pulled out so many important points there, and actually something we hadn't talked about in a whole year of doing this show is the shame surrounding illness. That you're absolutely right. Sometimes people do perceive someone who's ill as less than. Oh, they just can't do it. And then you get that almost that tilted head, that sympathy kind of thing, which is so awful if you've been used to doing everything and being on top of everything, and suddenly your body is just choosing not to play ball with you anymore.
You're right, exactly.
Horrendous. Yeah. I mean, with so much going on, so you've got the impact of the illness itself, that's one thing that you're struggling with, the confusion you're experiencing of why can't I do this, the frustration of I can't see it, you can't see it, no one understands it, and you're trying to possibly get a diagnosis and so on. How does that stress then impact us even more?
Yeah. Well, we know about stress, and I don't think we know, well, we certainly don't know everything, but we know that stress helps us to differentiate between what makes us safe and what doesn't make us safe. You know, like the child, you say, don't touch the stove, you touch it, oh, it burns, right, you're not going to do that again. But what can happen when we have a lot of stress over a period of time is it can actually make us almost hypervigilant. And so what that means is that we're looking out for stress everywhere. And, you know, different people experience stress in different ways. Some people have more resilience than others. But when we're actually experiencing a stress, what should happen is that we have these chemicals released in our body to address the stress. And we're on what we call a feedback loop. So we have those chemicals that are released to actually deal with that stress. And then once we've actually dealt with it, we should go back into what we call steady state. And we often hear about that in the animal kingdom. You know, you'll have something like a predator attacking a gazelle, and the gazelle gets away. The gazelle's fine. But with us as humans, we're not always the same. And so you know what it's like. You wake up in the morning and you're, oh, I'm late. Then you pick up your mobile phone, you see a message and it's like, oh, again. Yeah. And then, oh no, I haven't got anything for breakfast. And so on the way to work, you grab like a sugary cake or something like that. Then you get to work and your boss says, you were supposed to have this report in, and you thought it wasn't supposed to be until next week. And then stress upon stress upon stress. And this is like, you know, 9:30 in the morning.
Yes.
And so all of these chemicals are going off in the body to deal with these stresses, because these things are actually, you know, telling our body that we're stressed. And then what happens is those chemicals can stay in the body.
Yes.
And that's can be really dangerous. And so we can have things like, you know, our blood pressure can be elevated because we need our heart to pump to be able to deal with this stress. It could be that our body's actually saying, I need energy to actually deal with this stress. And so our blood sugar can be up and down and all over the place. And over a period of time, we can find that we have inflammation that builds up in our body. And you'll hear nutritionists and like me talk about inflammation all the time, because inflammation's great. You know, if we've got an organ in the body that's not functioning, if something goes wrong, we need inflammation as a buffer to allow that to heal. But if we have inflammation, you know, that's over a period of time, and a lot of it, what it can do is distort our organs, and it can release chemicals as well that give us more stress in the body. And so when we're actually feeling stress, it's not only dealing with the stress, the chemicals that are dealing with the stress, it's actually what happens if we have those prolonged in our body. So I know I've said a lot of things, but really, if we don't learn to manage that stress and we keep having stress upon stress upon stress, it can make us more ill.
Yeah.
You know, and have different conditions.
Again, really enlightening there, because it is about recognizing that when you're talking about the email and then running late and then having the sugary cake, that's not the lion in front of us. That's actually stuff we're propagating in our own minds. And if we can be doing that, again, just before 9:30, we could be doing that throughout the whole day, and then beginning to almost normalize this feeling that this is what it's like to have stress in my body, but that's okay because I'm still functional. But of course, that's the biggest problem, is when we start thinking, well, I can still function, so I'm okay. This is hugely important to discuss. So how can we then begin to manage some of that, especially if those stressors aren't going to stop, especially if you can't change your boss, or you can't drive a different way past the bakery or something like that. If you can't do those practical physical things, what else could we do?
And I think that's really important to recognise. You know, as I said, I've talked about me having chronic fatigue. We don't want to blame people. Stress is a part of life, and we have to have some kind of acceptance that we have more pressures. A lot of things are faster. And so, you know, actually recognising that, and people have different resilience. So we actually know that. But when I'm working with people, one of the first things I say is identify your stressors. Know, you know, the main things that really stress you out. And once you know something, you can do something about it.
Yes.
So know, you know, if it's that person, every time you get a call, you brace yourself, write that down, because then you can find a way to deal with that. And then practically, things that I suggest people do things like breathing. Now I say to people, breathe. Everybody's like, I breathe, I know how to breathe. But one thing is that we breathe in such a shallow way. We don't use the full capacity of our lungs. And then when we're stressed, we often end up breathing even higher from here. So it might not look like it from the outside, but it's almost like if we were having a mini panic attack. Yes. So we're stressed in our mind, our body's releasing all these chemicals, and then we do like that all the time. And our brain says, something's not right. We're not breathing, you're not breathing properly, you're stressed. So what do I need to do? I need to release these chemicals because there's a stressor and we need to mediate that stressor. And so, you know, I was talking about the feedback loop. It just goes on and it goes round and it goes round again. So learning to breathe, and that could be going for a walk. That could be meditating and learning through, you know, the meditation to slowly breathe in and slowly breathe out. Or it could be finding, you know, another way of just holding your body, like putting your hand at your chest and breathing in and breathing out. And one of the things that I just wanted to mention is that the way that I found out about this and the importance of it, I don't know if you've heard of Wim Hof, who does a lot around death, and about the cold and about breathing. And I did one of his workshops. It was just for a day, and it was about breathing. I nearly passed out. And I'm not saying that as a joke, because he was teaching us to breathe so deeply. This air that was in my lungs was actually reaching my brain in the way that it should have done. And I was getting so much oxygen that I felt really woozy. And that really shocked me and scared me in a way, because it just showed me I'm not breathing properly. And so I'm not actually giving my organs what they should have in terms of, you know, the oxygen, but also allowing nutrients to get to my organs. But my brain wouldn't be functioning properly because I wasn't creating enough energy, enough oxygen. So simply learning to breathe. I know that sounds really banal, but that's really important. And another thing, obviously, as a nutritionist, I would say is to eat well, because every, you know, organ, every tissue in our body needs food. And what we're looking for is food that's going to feed us. So I'm not like one of these people that say, don't eat this, don't eat that. You know, we can eat those foods that maybe we think we shouldn't eat so much of now and again. But the thing is not to eat them all the time, because as I was talking before, you know, we can build up this inflammation. We can have our blood sugar all over the place if we're not eating, you know, those foods that are good for us. And so we tend to go towards either being the sweet or the savoury. Which are you, Audrey?
I'm definitely savoury. 100% savoury, yes.
Yeah, I'm the savoury as well. And I say to people that are on the sweet side, if your thing is something like chocolate, first of all, put it in the freezer because it's slower to melt on your tongue. But have something like nuts, which mean that will be a slower releasing. But if like me, like you're more on that savoury, have a look at a food swap. And it can be something like having some carrot sticks with some hummus or something like that, because on that we're getting the crunch and we're also getting the flavour. Or it could be like having something like, I don't know, like an oat cake with some hummus or some banana on, things like that. And I know when I suggest this to people, some people say, no, well, that's really boring. I get it, I do. But if this is a problem for you, it can actually help doing a practical food swap.
Yeah.
So that breathing, that's eating well. And the last thing I'd say is to find something that is a distraction. So, you know, what we're looking for is not to, when we're stressed, bringing something in. When we're stressed, Googling, what should I do to, you know, help me with stress? Let's build something in before. So let's learn to go for those walks. Let's walk. Before this, because I hadn't done a show for a while, I was a little bit like, oh, I'm nervous. I had a dance off. So you move your body. So you're releasing that stress, and everybody will find something that's different for them. So find that thing. And then the last thing I wanted to say was about resilience, and I knew that I'd be talking to you. So jump in, because you've obviously written the book literally on it. But, you know, by building up that resilience, we actually increase our tolerance. And often we do that by doing things that are hard. We don't ever want to do things that are hard. But, you know, if we can do things that make us slightly uncomfortable, that can help. I mean, like years ago, I used to do a lot of improv. It's not strictly acting, but you have to, on the spot, you're given a topic and you have to react. And that was really nerve-wracking because I was with people I didn't know. But over time, it became so much fun.
Yes.
A little bit like doing this show. You don't know what's going to come up. And then over time, that actually builds confidence and builds resilience.
Yes, I fully agree.
Breathing well, eating, building up your resilience by doing things that can, you know, help you be distracted.
Yes, I love that. And that's exactly really important, because it's not just about dealing at the point of crisis of stress. It is about creating that body that is able to tolerate when it needs to, release when it needs to, but also has a natural way of kind of, oh, no, I just need to go for a walk. You can recognize the signals. And you've really brought out that mind-body connection in your responses. And I am really grateful to you for that, because so often we will almost just tell ourselves, oh, no, let's just carry on. But you're absolutely right. Whilst we're carrying on and we're getting more and more stressed, our brain is just thinking, no, physically there's something wrong, and it makes us respond even worse to what's happening. And so, no, thank you so much for that. That's so helpful. Now, something that you've just said yourself, you have shared your condition. And again, I'm very grateful to all our experts who do share what they've been through and how they've overcome things. How does sharing your own experiences help, especially when we're talking about hidden illnesses?
Yeah, well, for me, this is a bit of a paradox, because Obviously, being able to share is a really good thing. We need human connection. Yeah. We need that to survive. And so if you've got an illness, it's really important to have a healthcare professional, you know, a team around you that can help you to navigate that. And as I said, you know, we need that human connection to survive. But when we're talking to other people, particularly, as I said before, if they're really close to us, it can be triggering for them. You know, what's happening to this person that I care about? It can just bring out a whole host of things, especially if you have to take care of somebody and if you've got children, and you know, that's another responsibility. So, you know, when you're actually speaking to others, you need to be able to manage that. And one thing I would say is speaking to people who share the same language. So it could be people that have gone through the same experience as you. That's really helpful. But people who, they won't say necessarily, yes, I do understand, because they don't. But they will say, I'll walk alongside you. And, you know, that point about people who speak the same language, one thing I will say is that I've worked with a lot of people who join social media groups because they're, you know, they think, oh, this is great. This is a community with the same condition. But what can happen is that the focus is very negative because it's simply focusing on that condition, and every conversation or every post is about how awful it is, and it can actually make the person feel worse. So I said, you know, be careful when you join those social media or when you find YouTube clips of what you're actually looking at. You know, find people who will support you. And one thing that I say, it might sound like a little bit of a strange thing, but particularly with people that are close to you, find an article, or even, this is where the YouTube can come in really well, the YouTube clip, is to find a clip of people that are going through the same kind of thing. Because somebody who's close to you will be able to see it, and they'll be able to relate to what's actually happening, that condition, but it won't trigger them as much because they're not so emotionally involved. And I've spoken to people who've said, yeah, that's been really helpful in, you know, in being able to do that. And then, you know, I guess the other thing is that to feel strong and good in yourself when you're actually sharing with somebody. If you don't, then don't.
Yes. So important to hear this from you. I love the idea of the YouTube clips because it does give you that distance to be able to start a conversation, but without it necessarily being directly so personal. That's so important. And your point about finding a group that shares the language and shares the intention that you want to have is so important. That's really incredible help. And that actually answers the next question, which is how to begin to have that conversation. I think the YouTube clip is so good in terms of a starting point. Felicia, it's always a pleasure to speak with you. How can we find you if we want to, well, as our viewers might want to find out more about you?
Oh, thank you. Well, on social media, it's on Stressless Living, and on all platforms, you'll find me under Stressless Living.
Amazing. Thank you, Felicia. We're going to welcome you back to the show again very, very soon. Thank you so much.
So my top tip for the viewers is how to change a thought that's been consuming you for too long. So the first thing is, whenever you're having a big emotion, maybe you're anxious, you're sad, or something very negative normally, try to identify the thought. When you've got the thought clear, take a step back from the thought and ask yourself, is that 100% true all of the time? And if the answer is no, and it will be, it's time to rephrase that thought, that sentence, create a new affirmation for yourself, and just change that pattern, because a thought feeds an emotion and then it goes back on loop, and you have to stop the process. This is my tip for you.
We are talking about invisible illness, and we have a very special returning guest, Aaron Shergill of Raw Clothing, and you know Judith Crosier from the shows in general. Now, one of the biggest problems is getting a diagnosis in the first place. And why is that such an issue? I mean, you'd think it was quite easy. You go in, you explain your symptoms, and yes, I get that sometimes we might downplay our symptoms, or perhaps we go on a good day, and so we don't explain them. But sometimes we're just not believed either. So what have your experiences been like?
Yeah, I mean, like, with like my depression and anxiety, I had to fill in some like questionnaires, and then they kind of go off that. It was like relatively straightforward to get like a diagnosis for that. Not that like I went in to get a diagnosis for that, but the ADHD and autism was really complex. I had I think 11 questionnaires I had to fill out, and then I had 2 days worth of 2-hour deep dives into me, and they were like really mentally taxing, and I had them on consecutive days because I booked them in and I just didn't think about it, and so yeah, and then the other psychologist then spoke to my family and my fiance, so that diagnosis was a lot more difficult, but I think in terms of like why it's difficult to get it, I think it's because like there aren't these like tests that you can do, like if you know you have like, I don't know, a heart attack, they can check and you can see it, and I think that's the whole thing about like an invisible illness. You can't
exactly.
It's as good as your own diagnosis of symptoms in a way. It's good as your description of what's going on. What about yourself, Jude?
Well, it's very similar actually, even though it's sort of physical. With the rheumatoid arthritis, it's more of a process of elimination. They eliminate everything you haven't got, and then so they end up with, oh, so it must be this. And actually, years down the line, there's question marks over whether I was correctly diagnosed. So I still have the symptoms. So that's kind of really frustrating as well, because and also when I was diagnosed with it nearly 20 years ago, I absolutely refused to believe it. So there's a lot of things, because it's taken a long time to accept
it's age as well, isn't it? Because you think, I'm young, I shouldn't be.
Well, I was. I was really young 20 years ago. Yeah. And so it was really difficult for me to accept it. And then I did. And then to be told, actually, we're not sure whether you ever had it. And it's probably just gone to a very long-term remission with, you know, little flare-ups. Okay. So then by that time, you've taken all this medication, which potentially you didn't need. Oh, no. And it's medication that has a lot of side effects, one being weight gain. So, yeah, it's frustrating.
Yeah, that's awful. I mean, so that's when you might have, I guess, a misdiagnosis but can you press for second opinions? I mean, we don't always have the confidence, though, do we?
No. I mean, like, for me, like, I struggle a lot with, like, imposter syndrome. And when you're, like, going in... so when I went in for, like, my autism and ADHD assessments, I was thinking, like, okay, well, what if I don't exhibit this symptom, or like what if this doesn't come up, or when I'm filling out like a questionnaire or I'm speaking to a psychiatrist or something, what if this doesn't come up, what if that doesn't come up, and then you're like overthinking the whole thing, and then it's like a vicious cycle, isn't it, where it just gets worse because you start stressing about
it drains you. Gosh, we don't even realise that. And it's been shown in research that if you go to the hospital and get your blood pressure taken, it's much higher than it would be anywhere else. It's like white coat syndrome.
Yes.
But it's the same thing.
Yes.
When you're having to undergo test after test after test, you are going to get just more stressed. Your body is simply going to react to that. Yeah. And what about you, Jude? What are your thoughts about pushing for second opinions?
Well, in hindsight, I absolutely should have gone somewhere else and got a second opinion. But at the time, because... not everyone's the same, but I have, a real respect for authority. Whoever that authority is, I automatically respect them. And if you're told by a doctor that you have something, why would you not agree with it? Why would you not believe it? Yeah. And why would you question it? So, but in hindsight, I should have done. And I don't know whether it's too late now. I don't know. It's just a really good question.
It's one of those things, isn't it? Hindsight's a wonderful thing, but it's good to have the conversations just to think about that and perhaps stop somebody else from going through something similar.
Yeah.
What about before we realise anything's wrong? What sort of red flags or changes might we look out for and notice in ourselves? Is there anything particular that you would say now, with hindsight, I should have maybe raised a red flag at that point?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, like fatigue, I really noticed I struggled a lot with fatigue. I also struggled a lot with motivation. So I remember when we were packing to go to Lippery, it was during the World Cup in 2018, and everyone else was like running around packing, and I'm watching. It was like France, Belgium. I'm just sat downstairs watching. Everyone's like, "Are you not gonna pack?" And I just couldn't be bothered, and I was just like, had no energy, no motivation. I think one that's like really overlooked is like anger and irritability.
Yeah.
A lot of people just kind of see that and just think like, oh, he's, you know, like he's just confrontational and he's kind of looking for it, but actually, like, it is a really big symptom of not just like the mental health stuff, but also like the neurodivergent stuff as well.
Yes.
Like, the anger and irritability.
And pain, actually, as well.
Yeah.
That's really...
and then like the final thing I'd say is like, like the physical symptoms, there are some, like, so for example, like with my anxiety, I get a lot of issues with my stomach. And there's that, like, you get that sometimes when you feel low, you get that like sinking feeling in your chest as well. So I think like also be on the lookout for like those physical symptoms. If you notice those things, and then definitely get the check.
Yeah, really helpful.
Yeah, that's good advice.
Those are things which you easily think, oh, I've just had a bad day, so I must be feeling like that because of it, and people label or judge or make those sort of judgments. Also, when it comes to explaining your condition to the community, so something that I know you care a lot about, Aaron, is getting the Sikh community to understand mental ill health. It's something that I know in the Southeast Asian community, it's still not really talked about very much. Autism isn't really talked about very much either. No. Only the odd charity group who really understands it. It's then talked about, but only in those circles. So how do we get a community that has not wanted perhaps to recognise mental ill health or invisible illness to begin to be more understanding?
Yeah, I think the community's got to be willing to listen. I think it's kind of what we touched upon earlier, in terms of, you know, they have to want to listen and understand and believe that it is real.
Yes.
I think with like the shift to a more like Western mindset is kind of helping a little bit. There's a lot of, well, I say a lot. There's a few charities out there now within our community, sort of nationwide, that I've come across and know of, who are really putting their name out there and getting some traction. There's also a good friend of mine, Tanya, who is a suicide survivor, and she does a lot of talks as well. So we have to be, like, as a community, really proactive in dealing with it. We have to really help raise awareness in our own community. But also the community has to be willing to listen. And I think, yeah, it's important to kind of to have that willingness to listen and that belief, because otherwise we're not going to get anywhere without it.
Absolutely. And Jude, this is happening in the workplace community as well. So what are your experiences, and how have you been able to try and get them to understand a little bit better, or have you?
Well, the rheumatoid arthritis I never ever mention. I mean, I haven't had to do a medical questionnaire for work for a very long time. I think I had to do one for teaching, and it was just before I started teaching, actually. So, but I didn't need any adjustments or anything. But so, for example, going back to when I broke my wrist and my shoulder, you could see my wrist because of the cast. You couldn't see my shoulder, and I still have problems now. But it's just interesting because tiny minor adjustments, and you're brilliant at that. So, for example, I said to you, you know, it's easier for me to look one way rather than the other, because looking one way really causes a lot of pain to my neck and shoulder. And you were like, okay, well then sit here. So that was fine. but if I've translated that into my other workplace, they sort of, oh, okay, all right, I'm better move, you know. So there's that kind of an attitude.
The attitude.
And it's almost like, because they can't see it, you know, they're like, well, that was in August you had that accident. How can it still be hurting you now? So it's treated very differently with different people. And I think you're right from what you said before. It depends on how that person's feeling, you know, how much under stress they are that day, as to whether they've got any space for any, you know, way of looking into what other people have. So it's an interesting one, I think.
And this can also happen to some degree in the medical profession where, okay, it's known as medical gaslighting, and I'm not saying that we're necessarily talking about this here, but there can be experiences where people have just been dismissed. Oh, get over it. It's just a phase. You'll be fine. And whilst watch and wait is a genuine term, and they do that sometimes with cancer symptoms sometimes, that being dismissed really doesn't help, especially when you're being dismissed by a clinician. In your experience, are there things that the medical profession needs to perhaps do better?
For me personally, I haven't had sort of that like negative experience. I think, you know, like I could talk a lot about the NHS and its funding. I think that's kind of
important.
The most important thing, because when I first went to the doctors, they put me on a waiting list for CBT, which I believe now you have to self-refer. But at the time, they put me on a waiting list and they said 6 months. And 11 months later, I got the call, by which time I'd already had 15 sessions done privately, and I'd been kind of discharged from that therapist anyway. So I just think, if we can get like more funding towards, but they are looking at, they've introduced like the mental health line on 111 now.
Yes.
So I think like generally they're sort of, I mean, like for me personally, I think they're taking the right steps. Yeah,
it's getting better, but there are still problems, and I guess it'll still be a bit of a postcode lottery as to what the service is like in different places. But it's great to hear you haven't had issues yourself. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Jude, what about you?
Well, I have to say that I've received amazing treatment from the NHS, pretty much with everything. And talking about watch and wait, I kind of wish that 20 years ago they had watched and waited a bit more, rather than kind of jumping in with that diagnosis so quickly. Because if they have, I still don't know if they've misdiagnosed it. But if they have, then maybe watching and waiting might have told them something, you know, and I wouldn't have had the diagnosis and therefore the medication, etc. So it's a difficult one, but I as regard all the, you know, when I hurt my leg last year and my wrist and my shoulder and anything else I've done over the years, I've had really, really good treatment from the NHS.
Again, brilliant to hear.
I have been really fortunate, I think.
I think, as we'll talk about in the next half, it's going to be things like funding, like you say, and the time and targets. You know, we have to see that many people in this amount of time, where you just can't give people the care that you want to. And I think that's still a problem, but we will come to that. Yeah. We are going to say goodbye to some of our experts now and bring in others. And before we do that, our resident psychologist, Dr Meg Arrell, whose own PhD was on invisible illness, will be talking about some of the other experiences surrounding invisible illness. Over to you, Meg.
Hello, I'm Dr Meg Arrell, and I'm so happy to be with you again, especially on this topic which is very close to my heart. So person-centered medicine is so important when it comes to invisible illness. I actually wrote a book about this with my amazing colleague, Professor Christine Dancy, about how to cope with, well, what we see as misunderstood conditions. Because oftentimes we think that we're going to go to the doctor and there's going to be a very clear pathway to a treatment and hopefully symptom reduction, if not a cure. Oftentimes cures aren't possible and we're led to managing symptoms. But this journey can be much more of a squiggly line rather than a linear progression. And that really causes us some challenges. And the reason why I was so passionate about this subject is I had my own health difficulties. I have endometriosis, and it took, well, I would say 20 odd years to finally get diagnosed. That was quite a journey. On average, it takes between 8 and 10 years for a woman to receive a diagnosis of endometriosis, which is a very, very long time. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. So when I first met my colleague, Professor Christine Dancy, we worked at the University of East London, which was a really good place to work. And we created a research group called the Chronic Illness Research Team, because we found as health psychologists that there really was a lack of information about how illnesses impact people, in particular how some of the social aspects of our life do really influence our illness experience. So the model that we use is called the biopsychosocial model. So within that, the bio is all about, say, the physiological or biological disease processes that are going on within our bodies to create a set of symptoms. But that's not the only thing. And in medicine, sometimes that's focused on too much or just exclusively, and that's what is called the medical model of health and illness. Now, with the biopsychosocial model, there is the psycho, which is the psychological, and that's incredibly important because having a long-term condition, particularly an invisible illness, well, it impacts the way we see ourselves. It impacts our sense of identity. Oftentimes we place our identity in terms of what we can do, and having a long-term condition sometimes scuppers that a little bit or quite a lot. Then there is the social aspect, and here we did quite a lot of research about the impact of stigma on people's health in terms of their conditions. And what we found was that when someone was stigmatized, when people around a patient didn't understand their condition or, quite frankly, just dismissed it, well, they ended up having directly worse symptoms. So the interaction between the biological, the psychological, and the social components of our lives are incredibly, incredibly important. Now, when we have invisible illnesses, it's more likely that there's going to be some stigma attached. I can't tell you the amount of times people told me, well, you look okay, so you must be okay. Well, no. When we have invisible illnesses, of course, there is so much going on in our bodies, but also in our minds. But also, we tend to not want to present ourselves at our worst. We still want to present ourselves as our best. So what I found in my work, that oftentimes people with long-term conditions, they would rest up for a matter of days before perhaps seeing friends, perhaps going to an important meeting, and then would need to rest for quite a long time afterwards because there'd be a bit of payback for that. So there's quite a lot going on there, and we do moderate our behaviour when we start to have symptoms as well. So one of the reasons why personalised medicine is so important is that we can actually start to look at all three components of the biopsychosocial model of health and illness, and we can put in strategies to help with each of these components. And this is possible even before a diagnosis, particularly with the psychological and with the social aspects. So this more integrative way of looking at healthcare is one that I think is very worthwhile. So taking as a starting point the biopsychosocial model, what can we do to support ourselves and also perhaps support other people with conditions that are not visible from the outside? Well, one thing that we found in our research at the Chronic Illness Research Team was that many people had difficult interactions with healthcare professionals. They did feel a bit fobbed off and had to go back again and again to try and essentially fight for a diagnosis. Now, in terms of what we can do here, we can think about advocating for ourselves. And one way to do that is to be a little bit of a health detective, to collect information about your symptoms and your experience with this condition. There are many symptom diaries online and trackers, but you can use just a simple piece of paper and a pen to note down what's happening with you in terms of your illness experience on a day-to-day basis, but really importantly, how it's impacting your life. Are you able to work and work in the way that you want to? Are you able to look after your family? Are you able to take care of yourself? These are what we call activities of daily living, and they're very important when going to the doctor or a healthcare provider, because that will show how this illness is really potentially taking over your life. Now, also in terms of some of the social aspects, it can be challenging with friends and family who don't understand these conditions, and it can be exhausting trying to explain them over and over again. I know this from experience. And so I would actually like to talk to the friends and family of those of us with these conditions, and a few points. So the first point is there are lots of different sorts of support you can give, but advice giving generally isn't that helpful. So if you've heard that someone else has been cured by taking X supplement or doing this type of exercise or strategy, well, the person with the invisible illness, I promise you, they would have tried everything they possibly can. And when someone we know and care about constantly gives us advice, what we feel is that they don't think we're trying hard enough, where we are trying the hardest we possibly can to be as well as we can. So instead of giving advice, listen to how the person is feeling. Ask them how they're feeling. And this is more to do with how we're feeling emotionally. We can be feeling very frustrated. We can be feeling a sense of loss and grief for the person that we used to be. And that again is tied into our sense of identity. Other types of support that generally are well received, practical support. If someone's having a very difficult flare, say, what about shopping? Doing a bit of shopping, checking in, certainly checking in. For people with long-term conditions, it can be very hard to accept practical support, but it's always worthwhile. And finally, I want to go back to the topic of person-centered healing and how oftentimes going through these very difficult, challenging health conditions, they do, as we mentioned, change our sense of ourself and our sense of identity. In psychology, there's a concept called post-traumatic growth, and it's all about how we can discover different parts of ourselves when we've gone through very challenging times. And this is not in any way to negate those difficulties whatsoever. But for myself personally, and many people I've worked with, the level of compassion, the level of understanding, all of these very important emotional intelligence skills, they just are supercharged, and we can take those forward in our lives. And yes, we maybe wouldn't have chosen to have the condition we have, but when we're healing, a level of acceptance can be, well, it can be liberating. So I wish you the very, very best in your healing journey. And please do, if you have any thoughts, let us know. We'd love to hear from you.
Welcome back to our panel special of Mental Health Matters After Hours. We are talking about invisible illness, and in particular, how we need to take a person-centred approach when it comes to healing. We've just had the lived experience of Aaron Shergill. He's been speaking about his diagnosis with mental ill health, what he goes through in getting people to understand and see what's happening. And we also had our very own Judith Crosier talking about her diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis. As you can see, we have now new guests on our panel. We have new expert guests on. We've got Dr. Gus Chavez, who is a GP and a hypnotherapist. And a little special thing about Dr. Gus is not only has he been on the show before, but he's also trained as a hospital clown, and that was a really important part of taking a person-centred approach to healing. We also have returning guest John O'Poon. He is a speaker and a consultant, and he's an expert in the workplace issues that we might be facing. So welcome to the show, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Do you mind explaining a little bit about the importance of person-centred healing? We'll go to Dr. Gus first, because I think there's not enough time otherwise when it comes to taking a one-size-fits-all, and that's what people are doing because they are just trying to see lots of people.
Yeah, I believe nowadays medicine has structured itself within the health system, which is mainly focusing on speed and efficiency.
Yes.
Instead of focusing on quality of connection and connectedness. And I think that's a big change that we should try to make happen.
Yeah.
Because the patients, when they come to the doctor, they come with symptoms. And because we're so rushed to, that puts us in this problem-solving mode. Like we have to go to just solve it. So we normally don't have the time to go on the underlying issues of the symptoms, and then medicine loses that holistic purpose that medicine should have. We're no longer treating people, we're treating symptoms. We're alleviating symptoms.
That's really quite heartbreaking actually to think about, because that's not what healing is all about at all. That's fixing. That's problem solving, and that's not a healthy place to be. And kind of brings me on to my question for you, Jono, because I feel the workplace is going the same way. It's going down the route of we must do well-being, and so we need to look for all of those things. So let's fix everybody and write a policy and off we go. That's not enough either, is it?
It's not, and that's the frustrating part, because there's so many people that do struggle for being productive, but at the same time they're not getting the time to pause and slow down because they're looking, work's looking for results. You want to get the next result, you're chasing for the next campaign, you're chasing for the next win, you're chasing for the next sale, you're looking for the next KPI and hitting the goals, and there's no time to slow down and really pause and reflect and goes, what do they actually need?
Yes, yeah. And Jude, in your own experiences, how would someone stopping and saying, well, what do you need? What can we do? How would that have made a difference?
As we were talking before, one of the symptoms is sort of exhaustion. And so, not with teaching, it wouldn't have worked when I was a teacher, but maybe starting at 9:30 instead of 8:30 in the morning, that might have made all the difference to my day, for example. And we were also saying, just now with the issues with my neck and shoulder, just sitting in a different position and having a different height chair and table just makes all the difference, because in my other job I come away from a 3-hour meeting having to type into a laptop, absolutely in agony, and that can last for days just because of the position that I'm in. So just little changes like that can make all the difference.
And that's what brings me back to you, Dr. Gus. What would you like to see in the medical profession? How can we slow down a bit more? How can we take that person-centered approach and therefore give people the right treatment?
It's a very complicated question.
It's a big question. Answer it, make it all better for us.
But I'm going to try to see, let's go utopian a little. Yeah. I think it's necessary. I think we should try to aim to live in a world of we don't need the word utopia anymore. That's the way I try to, focus and live. But I think we have a system that we created and then because we created that system, we train our professions within the system and looking outside of it, exploring the horizon, it's no longer possible. Yes. People are they're so used to looking through life and through medical practice, through that keyhole, that expanding their minds to something else makes it very challenging. Yes. So I do, in this fast-paced world we live nowadays, everything has to be fast, and it's fast food everywhere, everything has to be for yesterday. Actually asking to slow down becomes counterintuitive. Yeah. But I think it's exactly what we need to connect.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. And this relates to a lot of your work when it comes to intersectionality and racial issues that the workplace faces. We have been looking through a certain keyhole, and shifting even a keyhole or our view is really difficult. How do you start to get workplaces to say, okay, let's break it down. This system doesn't work. Again, big question. Please, make us all better.
Well, workplaces are trying, and I say every company is different, every culture is different, every employer is different, every HR policies are different. But there are changes in what their approach is that they're trying to make mental health well-being more noticeable, more awareness, more talks, bringing in experts to talk to them, and generally trying to make an effort to make that change. But again, it's a big change, so it's taking the time out there's no one-size-fits-all approach. It's literally taking time out for every individual and saying, what do you need? Is there anything you do need that we do need to address? Again, it's very hard when you've got thousands of employees and hundreds of employees. So it's taking that approach to slow down. It's creating spaces.
It is, isn't it?
For people to be heard, be seen, be vulnerable, be okay with being themselves. And that was part of the fast-paced approach of let's get it fixed, let's get it done. But what do you need long term? Do you need therapy? Do you need counselling? Do you need ongoing support? Do you need new seat? Do you just need a new change of little things? Or do you usually start an hour later, so you finish an hour later, but then you get sufficient rest for the next day? If you're not a night owl, or if you are a night owl and you struggle with being an early bird, have the extra hour to sleep in, lay in for the morning, get ready when you're ready, and then finish whenever, an hour later or whatever afterwards. That kind of flexible approach, I think, works. And I think there are flexible arrangements in working hours and stuff that you can start doing now. It's not always just 9 to 5 or here's your shift. And you can, it's just a text rule. You can make exceptions if that individual really needs it. And if you really cherish your team and stuff, you would support them as much as you can.
Yeah, and maybe it's a case of starting just on a team-by-team basis, even if you can't do it with the whole organisation or the whole medical profession in your own practice, which is something I know you did, Dr. Gus. You can choose to work in that way, and you will benefit the clients that you have, and that's really important. Jude, over to you. One of the biggest themes that we've experienced during the last conversation was almost needing to have that resilience before you get a diagnosis, before the workplace or your community or even your friends and family understand that there's something wrong? Where do you find that inner strength to kind of keep going despite sometimes negativity?
I think I'm just so determined to get on with everything despite how I might be feeling, and sometimes that might be not the best idea. Sometimes I think you do have to listen to your body and give in to that. So if you're feeling really exhausted, or we were listening to Molly's story and it just really struck me. She was pushing and she did that for her mental health. Maybe it didn't benefit her physical health so much, and I think that is something to a much lesser degree, obviously, that I've experienced too. I just want to keep going, and I want to finish these things, and I want to stay up late and finish working on whatever I'm working on. And then the next day that has a massive knock-on effect because I'm feeling more exhausted. So
I think we forget sometimes that people actually are really resilient and want to do well. There's so much of this almost attitude of people are just lazy and people just don't want to do something, whereas actually I don't think that's the case. In your experience, have you noticed that there is this drive? People want to keep going, actually. Let's go to Dr. Gus.
I do see people struggling sometimes to keep going.
Yeah.
But the thing is that they're just trying to look for results. They want results. It's very result-oriented. And I try to change the focus to process.
Interesting.
Instead of just focusing on where you want to get, we take a step back and look, how could you get there more efficiently?
Yes, because the how is what carries through.
Yeah, because if you just focus on just doing what you can and what could give you the best result, you forget the result a little and focus on the process. And enjoy the process a little bit more. Try to learn with the process, to feel comfortable with the process. To the point where, exercising and actually doing it becomes a habit, and the habit becomes a ritual, and the ritual at some point will become your second nature. So you're no longer focusing on, I need to get here, because you're never going to get there. Because when you get there, there's a new goal. So you're just getting there, focusing on the process, will give you like a lot more freedom. You can breathe and just relax. And I'm doing my part.
Yeah, you that resonated with you. I saw that. Yeah, go on.
Well, I relate to that because I see a lot of men. We always think about. We've been brought up to fix things quickly, and we forget the process. We forget the journey, and even for the healing journey, it's about slowing down, learning, listening, pausing, reflecting, sitting with emotions that you're uncomfortable with. We always chase the next result, so we suppress our emotions. We suppress celebrations. We suppress being happy, being joyful, whatever the emotion is, and then we move on to the next thing quickly. Like, we don't take enough time to sit down and go, actually, I've looked back and what I have achieved throughout the process. Yeah. Like you said, building the habits.
We need to celebrate our wins. We forget to do that. Even if they're small, they're a big step.
Yes.
It's the small things, but the routines that become the non-negotiables. Yeah. I was talking to a lad who shared with me he didn't have a structure before. And he didn't have a morning routine, so therefore he used substances to cope with emotions and things like that because he didn't have a routine. He was just suppressing them with substances. But then as soon as he learned about habits, morning routines, going to the gym in the morning, then having a nutritional breakfast, and then having a structure where he's non-negotiable. Every morning at 5 a.m. he'll hit the gym for a year, and he's done that for a year, and he's become sober for like a year plus. And that's the kind of stories and things that we hear from the cave. And the habits that people do, there's the cold water therapy, people do the morning cold therapy dip. I've started to do that, and I start to see the process. I don't enjoy it. I don't like it. And I really hate the cold, and that's something that I just really don't enjoy. But through that process, I'm actually started appreciating the mindfulness that my thoughts have been calmer. I was nervous, for instance, here's an example. I was nervous coming onto this show because I was going to be on the panel with doctors, for instance. I was like, who am I to be on that panel? And my negative self-talk, I was catching myself. I managed to catch myself. That nervousness and the anxious feeling that I was getting, I was like, oh, it's been lasting for the whole yesterday and this morning.
Oh, no.
And that's just something because I didn't reframe it. I didn't reframe my thoughts. And as soon as I got in the water this morning and slowed down for that 3 minutes in the cold water, I was like, what's actually going on? Why am I feeling like this? And then a friend of mine, Ed in the cave, he said, what's actually going on at the moment? How are you feeling? I said, the water doesn't feel any colder than it was yesterday. It was still about around 7 degrees, but it felt colder this morning. He goes, well, are you under the weather? How are you feeling? And he said, generally, when he finds himself in those different areas that could affect how you perceive the water. And I was just like, what's actually going on? So I just sat down and sat with it. I was like, actually, I'm feeling a little bit nervous. And then there's a bit of anxiety coming up. Then I was like, why is that? I was like, oh, because I'm focusing on my identity about who I am. Why am I being on the panel? Why not someone else? And I'm making it about me. But it's not about me, it's about the cave. It's about the guys who's showing up every day, every week to do their work. And their resilience that they show is not about me at all. So then my thought that 3 minutes just flew by. I was like, I didn't even notice it.
I love that. And that kind of brings me on to the next question, which is going to be for both of you. We'll start with Dr. Gus and we'll come back to you, Jono. And I'm not ignoring you, Jude, because I've got a different slant on it for you. But I know something that you've said on a previous show, Dr. Gus, is exactly as Jono described. What people say is wrong to start with really isn't what's going on. How do you get beneath the surface?
Yeah, well, we need time. Because when people come to us, at least as a doctor, when patient comes to the doctor office, they come with their symptoms. And sometimes they even struggle to explain what the symptoms are. So we need some time to talk it through, understand what's the dynamic at home, what's going on. There's more to it than just that specific thing. And when we give you give the time to talk and really understand what's going on, you start to see the underlying issues. And with the 10-minute time frame, we mainly just give everybody paracetamol and ibuprofen. I've heard that so many times. People just go to the A&E and go back with just a prescription for that. And it's really frustrating. And when you actually, like in my case, like I'm working with women trying to lose weight, they come to me saying, I want to lose weight because I don't like my body appearance. I want to change my appearance physically. And when we start to talk about it, we realize there's a lot more going on. And then by session 2 or 3, we're focusing on building self-esteem, building healthier coping mechanisms. We're talking about completely the shift in our focus changes completely. And until we start talking about the real underlying issues, we wouldn't be addressing anything. Because that's what's stopping them to get to where they want. So we focus on that, and then the weight just comes off.
Yes, and that sort of relates to the work that you do in the man cave, where it's almost men, even if they can explain themselves, they've got a narrative on there that they need to follow through with. And so again, it's about finding a way underneath that.
Yes, this is the conversation we have very often. We hear a lot of stories. A lot of lads go to the GP, then they get prescribed antidepressants or things that they don't really need, but that's the symptom they're displaying about isolation, depression, and all those things. So that's what they get given. The time frame you don't have in the GPs is that time to talk, the time to process what's actually going on underneath the childhood traumas, your relationship with your parents, all that. That is not an overnight conversation. It's not something that just happened overnight, and it's something that you have to dig deep, sit with, process, understand, learn, self-educate. There's a lot of things that you need to go through, and it takes a lot of work. But GPs don't really have that facility and that time to do that, which is why the whole mental health awareness is great. And we're pushing a lot of narratives and stuff like that, but then it's also not great for the system because the system's not designed for it.
Exactly.
Which is what
that's why, and this is why the jigsaw is not working. The pieces is just clashing. It's not going to fit.
Yeah.
So there's a need for, again, creating safe spaces.
Yes.
Things like the man cave.
Spaces, isn't it?
Things about the lodge where people are okay to be vulnerable, to talk about their feelings, their emotions, what's going on in the house, and not feel judged, but they feel heard, they feel listened, validated what they're going through.
Yes.
And things like just having real, honest conversations.
And then just briefly over to you, Jude, because this one is something that I guess it's a putting you on the spot question, but I know you would be more keen to play down what's going on even when you do see the doctor. So again, how might a space allow you to be more open with symptoms?
Yeah, I do. Yes, I do. I only ever go to the doctor as a complete last resort, and don't tell anyone really. I think that a space that is a safe place and where people understand and want to listen, and also maybe experiencing some of the same things, and you can share as well. I think that would be. It's really, really important. And I know that, you do provide that. And I know that in your work as well, you provide that really safe space. And I think that sometimes just having that ability to share with others, it kind of reduces stress, it reduces blood pressure. You can see people, their shoulders go down and they relax and their faces change, their expressions, because sometimes talking is the most important thing that somebody can have at that time. And the diagnoses come later if that's what's appropriate.
Amazing. We're keeping our panel with us and we will continue this discussion just after this. Welcome back to our panel special of Mental Health Matters After Hours. We're talking about invisible illness and also about the importance of person-centred care when it comes to healing. We have our fabulous expert panel. We have got Judith Crosier, who you know from Mental Health Matters. We've got Dr. Gus Chavez and we have got John O'Poon. And we have been unpacking the problems with diagnosing illness in the first place and really going beneath the symptoms to really understand what's actually going on. And by the same token, that can affect the process of healing. Let's go to Dr. Gus. One of the hardest parts of the healing process is that we might never heal back to where we were once. And we sometimes have to let that part go or grieve that part. How do you help someone do that?
Firstly, I want to start saying that we should never focus on going back to where we were.
Okay. I like it.
I think we should always be evolving.
Love it, yes.
Because I think our goal in life is to always be, becoming ourselves.
Yes.
So we should never look back.
Yeah, beautiful.
We should never look forward. First thing.
Love it. Yes, I consider myself told.
I think it's an important tip because people are like, oh, I wish I could go back. Like, I hope you won't.
Yes.
I hope you'll never.
Yeah.
Because we're never the same. After a conversation, you've changed.
So beautiful.
So true.
You're changing all the time. So we're just going to focus on who you want to become. And I think the best way to do it, this is a weird tip because people don't like to hear this, but you should focus on becoming somebody you get inspired by, maybe a celebrity, maybe somebody you know. And if you don't have that person in mind or you don't have somebody that inspires you, focus on the person you envy.
Oh, I like that.
Which is weird when I say that because people go like, why would I? Because they probably have something you wish you could achieve. Yeah. And then look back into what they do. Yeah. And then you try to act it out.
Yes.
So, and the biggest misconception is that people want to change their lives. Yeah. And I always say, to change, we need to start changing here too. So the action, the doing, the practice. So build the habits, build the little by little, the routines, so that what you're changing within yourself at some point is going to get so intertwined that it's no longer an effort. You're just becoming that person you wanted to become.
Oh, that's beautiful.
But don't look back.
Yes, no, absolutely. I think that's
there's a saying we say, like, the nervous system or the brain, it prefers unknown hells to known heavens.
Oh.
So we always feel change can feel threatening. So knowing that is already important to you to know that you're going to go through a moment or think, is this me? And this is the becoming of you.
Yes.
So just be aware that just because you know consciously it's a positive change, it can still feel threatening.
Yes, which actually leads me on nicely onto my question for you, Jono, because sometimes people have a cultural narrative. I must be strong, I must be the provider, I must be whatever that narrative is. And sometimes the way they're going to grow, evolve, heal is not that stereotype. How do you help them break that and understand that actually there are so many opportunities and options out there?
Well, like you said, it's breaking that narrative. So firstly, being aware of that narrative that you're having with yourself. What am I identifying myself with? It's an identity thing. It's about, I am strong, I need to be the provider, I need to be the breadwinner. And you're putting all this pressure on yourself. It's like, who are you? But outside of being a provider and that identity that you fixated yourself with, who are you being? Who are you underneath all of that? You peel away all the onions and all the society pressures, the narratives. Who are you underneath? And that's the layers that you need to start peeling afterwards. It's looking at, who are you if you was to take away your name, if you was to take away your culture, if you was to take away your appearance, whatever it is. Who are you underneath that? Are you a loving, caring soul? Are you a kind person? Are you who are you underneath all of this pressure and stress?
Yes.
And we forget that because we're so busy trying to achieve the next goal, provide, pay the bills. And we forget, what is it? Who am I being?
And actually, now to you, Jude, if you then take those pieces of advice, which I think are really, really important, and look beneath the surface, how might that help you on a healing journey? If you sort of think, if you take away the labels or the expectations, how might that help you personally, I guess?
It's a really, really good question. And it's something I suppose I could apply, because I was doing some personal training a few years ago to try and kind of push through, the illness, so-called illness. But I had to stop when I had my injuries. And I'm just going to start that again. I'm actually just going to start that again. So actually, it's quite a nice question, because I can apply that to that. And I suppose if I think about, if I do strip, because it's hard, isn't it? When you want to start doing some personal training, you think, I haven't got the time, it's really expensive. But
I'm not that person.
Yes, exactly. And I'm not that type of person that goes to a gym once a week. But if you take away the time issue and you make time, you take away the expense, you somehow you have to find it because it's important. And then I suppose my inner values come out then, my determination, my wish to be healthy, all of those inner things. And it's a really interesting concept about stripping away. And everything you were saying as well can kind of be applied to that. It's not a great example, but...
No, I think it can, because as you say, your values come out and you become the person who can probably stick to it because you're focused on your values, not I'm such a busy person because I don't have time to do this, that and the other. This is a really complex but very fascinating and insightful conversation. So, thank you to our panel. Dr. Gus, there will be different patterns in medical diagnoses because people are going to respond differently. They're going to respond differently to healing. And how do you, and I know you left the NHS because you wanted to give your patients time. How do you treat people individually, knowing that two people can have the same issue, but it's not going to present in the same way, and their healing process isn't going to be the same? How do you maintain that person-centered approach?
I think medicine makes it very complex because medicine is built around statistics. Yes. So we're always looking at the average so that we can streamline care. Yeah. So we tend to fit everybody into the same box because it's like majority falls into this specific diagnosis, so this is probably you. I don't know if you've been in this like similar situation, but you go to the doctor and they try to fit you a diagnosis. Yeah. Like it doesn't match your symptoms, but that's what he has at the moment. And it's okay to just say, we don't know, we have to investigate. Or just listen to the symptoms. Give them time to go through the symptoms. Even there are 2 or 3 symptoms that doesn't fit the diagnosis, then maybe you should, we should be more open-minded and be curious to investigate. Yes. And really take the patient's words into consideration because they know their body, they know their health, they know what you're going through. Yeah. We cannot just go and say, this is probably this, and this is what you're having. Yeah. Which is what we're trained to do. It's like being trained in the system makes you
not a good practitioner.
Makes you limited.
Yes, yes. And I guess flipping that round, you might have somebody come to the man cave and go, I'm depressed. But actually it's not. It's something else completely. And when you listen to the symptoms, you're sort of thinking, don't think you are.
I do have something to add to this one.
Yes,
because
please.
I do have someone who came up to me and said, and shared, and he said this, he's happy for me to share this, I'm okay to share this. Yeah. Generally, we have a rule where it says whatever happens in the cave stays in the cave, but there are things where they have given me permission to share. And there was this case where he came to us with depression and all of this, and got prescribed antidepressants and all that stuff. That was the symptoms he was displaying.
Yeah.
So then they said, here's antidepressants, take these for a while and then see how you get on. And he felt even worse afterwards. And he goes, well, actually, I don't feel like these are working. Can I get a blood test and actually find out what's going on?
Yes.
So then after, I don't know, a month or 2 months of taking antidepressants, which really, really ruined his sleep patterns and the way he was just being as a human, functioning as a human being, he said, this is not right, something's not right, something's not. So he did the blood test results came back and said, oh, you're lacking in vitamin D. You need to start taking vitamin D tablets, and then to eat more vitamin D nutrition food like omega fruit, like fish and all that stuff, just to bump up your nutritional deficiencies that you're missing.
So much simpler.
Yeah.
Why could they not have started with a blood test first and said, let's just do a blood test and see what's happening with your body first?
But that's a problem we have when we're in the medical sector, because we're so trained to talk about diseases and treating illnesses, we forget about treating people. And when I was still working within the system, I would say something like, okay, you're showing me this. We're not talking medicine until we make some changes first. So what can we do today that might make tomorrow better? Yeah. And we'll go with anemia, can be anemia. It could be vitamin D deficiency, hypothyroidism. There's so many things that could give you the symptoms of depression before being in depression.
Yes.
And that exact same thing happened to me recently. I was feeling really low, really tired, physically couldn't get out of bed in the morning. I was prescribed antidepressants. I didn't take them. And then I had a blood test months later, literally a few weeks ago, and it said I've got extraordinarily low folate levels. So that explained all the symptoms, but so did depression. But the depression was easier just to say, here's some tablets. So the exact same thing as you're both describing.
It's the time frame. We don't have time, or we don't have...
It's
the curiosity we need to have, the open-mindedness.
Yes.
It's willing to be like, what could it be before I just fit them into this specific box?
Yes,
It's
and
that
I
instant
understand.
fix. It's that instant fix that everyone's looking for, right? What can we do to fix you now?
Yeah.
And not actually solve the actual problem that's going on.
There's another thing that I have to mention. There are some patients that want the instant fix.
Yes.
And those are the most frustrating for me.
Okay.
Because I'm like, no, just give me the pills. I'm like, no. We have to see what we can do so that you can live better. It's not just getting away, getting rid of the symptoms. How can we live better? Oh, there's too much work. Let me just, no. And this is really frustrating as a doctor because I'm like, oh, no, that's not what I'm here to do. That's not what I want to do.
So they want the sticking plaster. They don't want to actually solve the underlying issue.
It's the instant gratification, isn't it?
Yes.
What can we do to fix this now? And not actually go into my childhood and talk about the actual underlying as behaviours and habits.
It's the solution-focused mindset. Like, just solve it.
Oh my goodness, this is such an enlightening discussion, and it's worrying as well. And I see it with my practice as well. I have a client who wants an instant fix, keeps saying to me, "But how do I just become more confident?" And it's in the last session I had to say, we've been talking about this for over a year now, and I have given you a number of exercises. The question I'm asking you now is, why haven't you been doing them? And it's that constant having to ask, what are you benefiting from not doing this exercise? What are you benefiting from not making that change that seemed so easy to be able to do? And it is, sometimes people just want a pill. And
yeah. I have a saying about confidence, because whenever people come to me, I need to be more self-confident. And I'm like, confidence is a verb. So if you're not conjugating it, it's not going to happen. So if you just want to talk about it, it's great. But until you start doing it, you won't get any confidence back. So
that was pretty much the conversation. You have to start building it, and you have to start practicing it. And it's about taking action. And that, I mean, we could talk all day about this, but we don't have the time, and I'm really sad about that. But we are going to give you top tips from our experts to be able to voice your symptoms, to be able to speak to those health professionals, and also to recognise in yourself when something is going wrong. We'll be back after this.
So my top tip for you is being grateful about what you have in your life. And my exercise for you and my challenge for you is to write down 100 things that you're grateful for on the list. And I say write it down, because the more you write it down, the more easier it is for you to process and acknowledge what you have in your life right now. And when you embody it and you actually feel it, the more grounded you feel and more humbled you feel. And actually processing that grateful feeling of going through, this is what I have and I need to be grateful for, because there's so many things that you may have right now that someone else across the world may not have.
A massive thank you to our panel. This has been such an interesting and enlightening discussion, and you must come back again because we need to talk more about all of these topics. What are the things the key things that we're still not understanding enough about invisible illness and how patients might present with symptoms? I mean, for me, it comes back to people not being able to voice them. We don't understand ourselves what's going on. How on earth can we explain that? And worse still now, sometimes I have to do it over a phone or over a FaceTime rather than being in person, so it's even more removed. So that's the issue I have there. But what do we still need to learn about changing the system? Yeah, go for it, Dr.
I think for doctors, what I have to tip for them would be, whatever they're saying as a symptom, write it down.
Yes.
Even if it doesn't fit exactly the combo, it doesn't, it might be something relevant because they know what they're going through. We don't, and we're there to listen. And for, I think, the patients, I would really ask them if they can, because if it's a booked appointment, write down what you're feeling.
Yes.
Because we tend to forget. And when we're there, the questions come. We don't have time.
The line goes empty.
And your mind goes blank. And it's very frustrating. As a doctor being like, come on, what's going on? And you're like, I don't have time, but I do want to listen. And they're like, I don't remember really what I came for. And I'm like, oh, this is not the time. You should write it down. Write it down.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, you're so right. And just a digression before we go to Jono's tip here is, this is where hospital clowning actually really came into its own, didn't it? Because going into the hospital as a clown, you were having conversations with patients, not about their illness at all. Yet all of these things would come out.
Yeah.
That's just brilliant. Do you have any sort of stories where you kind of go, wow?
Oh, I have one, but it's kind of long.
Go on.
Okay. I remember this one time where we were playing hide and seek within this big hall.
Yeah.
So there's like so many people. There's a cafe with tables out. So there's like a big place in the hospital. So we were just scattering around ourselves like
and these
clowns.
Are doctors and psychologists,
doctors, nurses,
as clowns.
So you can spot us very easily because we're all very colorful and walking very, wobbly around. And we would just hide amongst people, So I sat at a table pretending to be reading a newspaper that I made a hole in and put my nose in. So, only the nose was like out. And the woman in front of me, she was like, oh, I'm so glad you sat here. And I was like, oh, I was not supposed to be interacting right now. But I was like, okay. And she was like, I really needed some joy today. And I was like, oh, I'm glad I'm here for you. And she said, my husband just got a diagnosis of cancer and this and that. And I was like, I'm really sorry. I thought, no, that was a week ago. So we're now just processing his death. Has he just passed?
Gosh. Oh, no.
And then she started to cry. And those are the moments that we don't have as doctors. Because they don't have the time to go through that emotional process with us. Because we're there to we have another patient to see. We still have, a lot to do. And I'm not, how can I say this? I'm not criticizing our profession. Yeah. I know there's a lot on our backs. Like we have a lot to do. There's so many paperwork. People have no idea. So we don't have the time sometimes. Yeah. But I could, at this point, as a clown, be there. In the end, she said, like, could you come with me to the bedroom so that you can see the rest of the family? We're still there. And I said, oh, I'd love to. And I said, actually, I couldn't. I said, I'm sorry, I cannot go. Yeah. But I can walk you there. Oh. And then she stood up and she said, like, you're still hiding. So, and then she went back to play from crying to playing. Yeah. So it was just a small moment, like a very short moment, where she could actually be vulnerable and let herself go for a bit and not have to be the rock for the family.
Yeah. Yes, and that's where you would have had that actual real connection, which would have helped start the healing process. Yeah. That moment. Oh, that's beautiful. It's just hairs on the back of your neck go up. That's lovely. Oh my goodness. And Jono, yourself, you talk so much about the importance of safe spaces, which is so true, and creating that for people.
Yeah, creating safe spaces isn't something that, again, happens overnight. It takes a lot of consistency. It's the energy from everyone that shows up, everyone that's willing to be vulnerable, everyone's willing to share things that they don't normally share about themselves, being really honest and real, and going through the emotions. And that takes a lot of courage, a lot of bravery. That also losing that fear of being judged by other people. And we create that safe space by showing up ourselves as individuals. We share our journey, we share our experiences about that, being things like myself in bereavement, overcoming bereavement and stuff like that, and how I managed to push through time, that healing process when you start being comfortable with the uncomfortable. Yeah. All of this effort and community and culture takes a lot of work from everyone to be accountable for themselves.
Yes.
But also showing up for themselves when they come to the cave or come to the lodge. It's about expressing what's going on, what they're feeling right now. And once you're able to do that, you start that journey of healing, that journey of self-awareness. What's going on? Why am I feeling the way I am? Letting go of all of the outside perceived labels and titles that we all carry, whether we're doctors, CEOs, dad, mum, wherever it is that you're carrying as that identity. You're there to just be in 2 hours, to support one another, and having that safe space and that non-judgmental place to share what's going on. You know, I'm feeling nervous, I'm feeling anxious, I've got a job interview, I've got, you know, I lost a job, or I just lost someone close to me. Wherever it might be, it's something that people don't talk about, and creating that safe space it takes work, it takes time, but it is more needed than ever right now.
Yes, and healing really starts from truth and being raw and being honest about what's actually going on. And I know for you and myself, Jude, we have these conversations and we have hour-long shows with the experts purely because I don't think you can get into what's really going on with any mental health issue or well-being issue in 10 minutes that you get on the news or on something else. And so from these discussions, what do you take away?
So much. It's brilliant having, you know, experts in the field to listen to, and to, you know, you talk so much sense, but also little insights into what you do, and you just think, gosh, the world is such an amazing place, actually.
Yes.
And that's sort of what I've taken away from this mainly, really, is that a couple of things, but one is that people actually do really want to help. So if you've got an invisible illness, whether it's a mental health illness or a physical illness, but nobody can see it, actually I think people do care and do want to help, even if they don't have much time. But just maybe just sharing and just saying, look, I just need a little extra support with X or Y. And alongside that goes as well looking after yourself. I mean, you know, I do push through, and I push through too much, and I know that I do, because then I end up, you know, suffering for that. So as well as everyone else around you, really, they do want to be kind, and they do want to help. I think you have to be kind to yourself as well.
Amazing. Well, from myself, from Jude, our panel, Dr. Gus and John O'Poon, we wish you good mental health and a good night.